feel this part about setting the motivation is very, very important. And it's something that our school system never thinks about. Yeah, we send kids to school to learn reading, writing, and thumb exercise. But we don't teach them how to be good human beings. We don't teach them how to have a good motivation or how to distinguish what is a good motivation from a rotten motivation. And in fact, mostly our society doesn't look very much at motivations. It just looks at appearances, external appearances, how you look, how you, what people think you are, not what you really are. So this brings a lot of trouble, of course. Yeah? But in Buddhism, the real value of any action we do is very dependent on our motivation for doing it. So two people could do exactly the same action with two totally different motivations. That would bring not only different short-term results, but very, very different long-term results. Yeah? So it's quite important to look at our motivation because, as we learn about karma, we learn that happiness comes from a good motivation, from acting with kindness and generosity and love, compassion, and altruism, and of course wisdom. And unhappiness comes from unwholesome motivations, anger, attachment, jealousy, conceit, laziness, and so on. And so it's really important to be able to identify what our mental states are when we're having them, and then to be able to discern which ones are ones that are going to lead us in a good direction that we want to go in, and which ones are going to lead us in quite a destructive direction that we don't want to go in. And so this is part of the beauty of the Buddha's teachings is, learning about this, learning how to look at our mind, learning how to discern what is wholesome from what's unwholesome, or what is virtuous from what is not virtuous, and then learning how to increase the positive mental states and how to get a handle on and eventually eliminate the destructive mental states. So it involves, looking inside and having that kind of internal work, which is, like I said, very different from our society, which is all about looking good, and selling ourselves and presenting an image. So, when I was talking about two people can do the same action with two different motivations, a good example of that is an action of, let's say, generosity. Somebody making a contribution to a charity, one person making it, the contribution, with the thought of, I made a pretty good donation. They'll put my name up on the wall. Or when they send out their annual report, I'll be in it. And I gave it to a group of people that has categories of donors. Yeah. So I gave $1 more than the amount necessary to become the top level donor. And they publicize your names, and then you get good tickets, you get to sit in front, you get acknowledgement, you get invited to meet all the important people, and then people will think I'm very generous and I'm a very good citizen. And this will be very good for my reputation and also for my business. So somebody can give with that kind of motivation. Somebody else can give to the charity with the motivation of, may all the people who this charity serves be, overcome whatever suffering it is that they have. And may they learn how to be happy, get in touch with their internal joy, and be able to make their lives meaningful. Okay. So our society looks at the first person and says, wow, that person's so generous, especially because they give a whole lot. And the other person who maybe didn't give quite as much because they don't have as much, we ignore. But who was the generous person? Yeah. So, making a donation, but with the motivation for one's own aggrandizement, that's, on the outside it looks like generosity, but it's really not, is it? Whereas another person can have a real generous heart, and even though they don't have a lot to give, their motivation is really strong and very, very compassionate. So I know many of you are doing the chaplaincy program now in hospitals and palliative care and prisons and wherever. And so the motivation is really key to that, to make sure that it's something that is virtuous, that we're engaging in when doing that. Because sometimes we can do what looks like good deeds, but our mind is tangled up in all sorts of weird emotions. For example, are any of you Mr. or Ms. Fix-It? You want to fix other people's problems? Yeah? Who feels an overwhelming urge when somebody has a problem to give them advice and fix their problem? Yeah? It's like, okay, I got what your problem is. Don't tell me the emotional stuff. I really don't like that. Here, just do this. And so we have advice for everybody about how they should live, what they should do, whether they want our advice or not, doesn't matter, we give it. Yeah, because we have this feeling of, like, I gotta control the situation by fixing the problem, otherwise, who knows what's gonna happen. And that's kind of scary. Yeah, that's it. Huh? Yeah, okay, so I think in like a situation like that, it's to really be effective, we have to stop and look at what our motivation is. Yeah, are we motivated to help others out of fear? Like fear that the situation will get worse, fear that it's out of our control, fear that it's really ugly. And so before it could get too ugly, I better jump in and save the other person. Yeah, this is called the Jesus complex. No, but seriously, you hear this dynamic. What do they call it? A drama triangle of the victim, the rescuer, and the perpetrator. Yeah, so we jump in and we're going to rescue the victim from the perpetrator because the whole situation makes us uncomfortable. Okay, so when we're helping with that kind of motivation, which is often unbeknownst to ourselves, because we think we have compassion for the person who's suffering, But actually underneath, there's fear and discomfort from our side. Yeah? And so then we tend to want to control and give advice. And then when lo and behold, the other person doesn't follow our advice. Can you imagine that? Yeah, my astute advice, which always works and is good for everybody, that the whole world should follow. These people say, get the out of here and stop telling me what to do, stop bossing me around. Have you ever had that happen, especially when you're trying to save a family member? Yeah, this works really well with families, you know? Yeah, and then things, you know, they don't turn out so well. Because our motivation isn't so clear. Yeah, there's some compassion, but there's fear and control issues. Okay? So I think to be a really effective caregiver or a really effective, compassionate person, you know, what is most important is being able to look at our own mind and see what our own motivations are and what's really going on inside of us. Yeah, because I think whenever we go to a situation, you know, our society is so focused on technique. Yeah, we'll teach you a technique, how to do this and that. But I think techniques are good. I'm not putting down techniques. But I think the most essential thing when we're going to a situation and when we want to help is who we are as a human being. Yeah, who we are. What, when we walk in the room, what does our presence give to somebody? Yeah, do we have the ability to listen? Do we have the ability to know when to stop listening? Because letting the person keep on talking is not good for them? Yeah. Do we have the ability to listen from our heart, even at things that we don't like or that scare us? Do we know when to give advice and when to keep quiet? Yeah. Do we know when to let somebody figure it out for themselves and how to help them figure it out for themselves? Are we able to sense when the person isn't going to listen to us at all, and still keep the door open? Yeah. Do we know when to pretend we didn't hear something? And do we know when to say something directly to somebody to help them look at something? So all of this is some kind of internal sensitivity, I think, that we don't get just by learning a technique. I think this kind of internal sensitivity comes from knowing our own mind. Yeah, and being able to tune in a little bit to where other people are at. We may not be able to tune in completely, probably only Buddhas can do that. But, you know, if there's a lot of chatter going on in our own mind, that inhibits us from really tuning into where the other person's at. Has Rinpoche, does he ever use the Tibetan word NamTok? Has he ever used that? It's a Tibetan word, yeah. NamTok. It means many different things, but one meaning is useless conceptual blah blah. Yeah. Lama Yeshe used to call it superstitious thought, in that it's, not superstitious like, there's a black cat kind of thing, but, just over-conceptualizing a situation. Like, how we get when we ruminate about something? Yeah? It's like somebody says one sentence to you, and you take that home. What did they mean by that sentence? They could have meant this, they could have meant that. I know them well. 5 years ago, they said this to me. Does this follow up on what they said there? But everybody's always talking to me like that. Nobody really respects me. They always brush me off. And that's what that remark meant, And it's like, I'm totally fed up with getting brushed off. What am I going to do? How am I going to confront? That's the other American thing we do. I'm going to confront them on it. Why do you brush me off? And we're going to have a nice long talk about this, until I get it resolved and blah, blah. That kind of thinking, yeah? And then you psychoanalyze it this way and psychoanalyze, because this person, after all, they are passive aggressive, but last year they were bipolar, and next year they'll probably have one of the new disorders that they just put in the what is it?
DSM.
Yeah,
DMS.
DMS 5? DSM 5, yeah. Okay, so it'll be a new disorder. So so we psychoanalyze. We analyze everybody, and we spend so much time just spinning. But it's all about our own issues, isn't it? Yeah. In that example, it was everybody brushes me off. And we come into a situation with the expectation to be brushed off, and sure enough, that's what these people do. Because we present ourselves as a person who is going to be brushed off. And in addition, we interpret everything that way. Even when they're not brushing us off, we interpret it that they are. And then that becomes a little bit of an obstacle to seeing the other person, doesn't it? Yeah. Just a little bit of an obstacle, because all of our own NamTok is just, that's all we can see. We're involved in all this spinning around our own self. Yeah, the self-centered thought. That one, again, I'm sure Rinpoche's talked a lot about that one. But we don't have problem with that, do we? It's other people that are so self-centered. But we're very compassionate, we know that already. Yeah, so, this is the kind of thing we have to look at, I think, if we're really going to be able to develop the kind of compassion that tunes into people. Yeah. People ask me, about the prison work that I do. I never intended to do prison work. I grew up as a nice middle-class Jewish girl. Nice middle-class Jewish girls do not do prison work. Yeah, they marry nice Jewish upper middle-class But I was a little bit, I didn't fit in so well. So, so I started doing prison work simply because one guy wrote me a letter. This was when I was at Dharma Friendship Foundation in Seattle. somebody wrote me a letter asking for, some Buddhist reading material and so on. And I have the Bodhisattva vows, so I never thought, do I answer or not answer? Of course I answer. Somebody wrote and asked for help. And what was very interesting is he said he wrote 25 organizations. I was the only one who responded. But Dharma Friendship Foundation was not on the list of organizations he wrote to. So go figure that one out. Anyway, that's how I started prison work. Yeah. And then he told other people, and other people started writing me, and then pretty soon I'm writing to a number of guys in prison. Yeah, now at the Abbey, the other nuns and monastics are involved in it, and we send out books, we answer Dharma questions, we go into prisons and give Dharma talks and so on. But I remember when people found out that I was doing prison work, and especially that I went into prisons, they would say, "Aren't you afraid?" And I said, "No." Because when I go in, the guys are usually very grateful. And they're not going to do anything. And if somebody else did something, they would pop up and protect me, I'm sure. Yeah. But I'm not afraid when I go in. I meditate on Chinresi, the Buddha of Compassion, beforehand. And I go in and I think not only about the prisoners, but also about the staff. Yeah. Because I think the staff suffers a lot, because there's always so much conflict between the staff and the inmates. And you never hear people say, "I want to grow up and be a prison guard." Do you? Nobody says that. So I always try and cultivate my motivation before I go in and think, I want to be kind to the guards, and I also want to be kind to the inmates. And be able to instill both of them with some kind of feeling that they too can make a compassionate difference in the world. Some of the guys I work with have done the actions that I am most terrified of. And it's been an incredible learning experience for me, because when they write me, some people who correspond and deal with inmates, they never ask what the person did. I always ask, or I look it up online. Because if I'm going to help this person, I have to know what's going on. But, so you learn, somebody's been a rapist or who knows what, whatever you're most afraid of. But then when you meet the person, when you talk to them, they're just another human being. Yeah. There are a number of mentally ill people in prisons that should not be in prison, but due to the kindness of Ronald Reagan, who closed so many mental hospitals, they got released on the street. They're in the prison. They don't belong there. They need psychiatric help instead. So there are those people. And then there's other people who happen to be at the wrong place in the wrong time, and people who did not learn how to think clearly, and people who were acting out of their own pain, and people who happen to be a member of a minority group, who get busted, with rates way higher than Caucasians, who do the same thing. So, it was an incredible experience for me, really, to learn to open up and see these are human beings. Yeah, they aren't numbers, they aren't statistics, they aren't evil through and through. They are human beings, just like me. And if I had grown up in a different situation, I might have done what they did. Because when they tell me about how they grew up, then you understand why they're in prison. Yeah. Because children should not have to experience what most of these people experienced when they were kids. Yeah. And yet our society is willing to spend more money to build more prisons, but we do not want to increase taxes for schools. Yeah. This is what you call stupidity. Seriously, if we put more money into education, we wouldn't have to build so many prisons. So when you're doing this kind of work, you know, you have to be open to be challenged, you know, to have your assumptions challenged, to enter into another person's way of thinking, to enter into their socioeconomic class, to enter into their ethnic way of thinking. You know, you have to open. And it's really quite a wonderful experience that way. To create avenues of communication with people that you used to be terrified of, but now you can have a dialogue with as one human being to another. And I think there's kind of a similar thing when you're doing hospice work, or when you're working as a chaplain, you know, in a hospital, to really meet people where they are. I remember I did one chaplaincy training thing. It was just a couple of, you know, just a few, like 6 or 8 kind of lessons. It was so funny. There were maybe 40, 50 people, and they had everybody go around and introduce themselves. I was the only Buddhist. You know, there were Presbyterians and Episcopalians and Catholics and Methodists and born-agains and evangelicals and maybe one Jew. I don't think there were even any Muslims. And the people teaching it said, "Wow, what variety we have." When everybody there was one brand of Christian, or, you know, one or another brand of Christian, except maybe 3 of us. It was quite interesting. Oh, what a variety of people. And I'm going, variety? Not to me. But anyway, yeah. But I remember on my practicum, you know, when I had to go in, I was, you know, walked in with a couple who had just, she had had a stillbirth. Yeah, and so of course is really grieving the loss. Both parents were grieving the loss of a child. Yeah, which is quite painful. And the man said to the woman, "We can have another one." And when I said that, when I went back in the group, people were saying, you know, like that's the wrong thing to say when you're grieving a child, to say we can have another one because you're grieving the one that was just there. Okay, but I didn't know anything about that at that time, you know. So it's you know, this thing of like learning from experience and how's somebody going to feel and what do they need to hear at what time. Yeah, it's really quite delicate, and especially in a hospital situation, because it's usually crisis, or, you know, very often crisis-oriented, Or somebody's dying and the family is, chaotic, as often happens, in the death of the family. And as a stranger, you're walking right into that situation. And how do you work with it? How do you tune in to who needs what? I remember one time doing a home visit. I don't, usually do this, but as a monastic, you get asked to do all sorts of things that you don't usually do. Yeah. So the family asked me to come because one member of the family, who was an adult, was dying. And I went into the living room, and the rest of the family is there. And I only got 5 minutes to talk to the dying person because the rest of the family was in so much turmoil. Yeah. And it was, a thing for me, well, am I supposed to talk to the rest of the family? Because the rest of the family was so focused on their own emotions that they couldn't pay attention to the person who was dying. They were so much in reactive mode of we can't lose this person and we don't want to lose them and this and that and the other thing, that they couldn't pay attention to the person who was dying. Yeah, and I barely got in the room to talk to the dying person after about an hour and a half of talking to the rest of the family. Yeah, so you kind of have to suss situations out and see where you need it and what can you do. And I really began to see also through I went with another family. A man was dying and I knew him. And I knew, I didn't know everybody in his family. I knew his wife and his best friend. But it became very clear when I went down. He had had a lung replacement and kind of did well for a while and then really went downhill. And so he was on a vent and they were going to pull the vent because he wasn't going to get better and he was just doped up all the time. They brought him out of the doped upness enough to ask him if he was ready to go, and he said yes. So I went down there, and it became so clear to me at that time why, when we have attachment to somebody who's dying, how much of an obstacle attachment is to helping somebody who's dying. And so this is coming back again to our motivation and our state of mind. Because at that time, they took him into another room. They were really nice, so because he was in ICU where, everything's going on and it's noisy, and we were able to get him in another room. And, they removed the vent. And I was there completely focused on him, giving him instructions, how to think, what to do, and doing mantra and so on. And the rest of the family, they loved him terribly. His wife, his 2 kids, his best friend were there. They loved him so much, but they were so overwhelmed with their own grief of losing him that it was impossible for them to think about his experience as a person who's dying and what to do to be able to help them. Yeah. It sounds funny, doesn't it? The person you love the most, sometimes at the time they're dying, you can't help them at all because you're so involved with your own stuff. Yeah. So I was so glad that I was there, because I had enough space where I could just focus on him and help him die. And then after, the breathing stopped and so on, then get the rest of the family on board and to do some mantra and to recite prayers and different things like that. But at the time he was dying, they were completely incapable of tuning into where he was at, because the attachment was so great. Okay? So what I'm getting at in all, again, this bringing it back to the main point, is that if we're going to be effective in helping people, we have to really work on ourselves and free our own mind as much as we possibly can from attachment, from fear. Yeah? When you go in a hospital and, sometimes people don't look so nice when they're sick. Yeah, and are you able to look at somebody who doesn't look so nice or who doesn't smell so nice? Do we feel comfortable being around that? Or again, is our fear going to come up and make it difficult for us to tune in to where they are? So I think that what is really important is studying our own mind and seeing what blocks us from tuning in to where people are at, and then to look at the various antidotes, to remove those obstacles. So for example, with attachment, the standard Dharma antidote is, what do you meditate on for attachment? Impermanence, right? Okay, so you have to start meditating on impermanence now, not 2 seconds before you go into the hospital room where somebody you care about is dying, So we have to be able to do the meditation on death, not only the 9-point meditation, death is definite, the time of death is indefinite, and at the time, it's of death, only the Dharma counts, because we separate from our body and possessions and relatives and friends. Doing that meditation, doing the meditation on imagining our own death. Yeah, imagining you get a terminal diagnosis, we all have a terminal diagnosis, but how often when we meditate on death do we contemplate our own death and our own terminal diagnosis? Yeah. But, when you get a more specific terminal diagnosis, how are we going to respond to that? Can we accept the fact that our body is aging and falling apart and we're going to separate from it at some time or another? Yeah, how do we feel about that? So, and if you have a terminal diagnosis, what are you going to do? Yeah, are you going to freak out? Are you going to get angry? Are you going to go into retreat? Are you, or do you have a bucket list that consists of going to Disneyland and, skydiving and doing all sorts of stupidagios before you die? Yeah? But, really thinking about this kind of thing and getting familiar with it and thinking about the death of the people that we're very close to. And what's that going to be like? And how can we help them? I felt very fortunate in having met the Dharma when I was young. And so I had, young, I wasted 24 years before I met the Dharma, but, I met it when I was 24. And then, my dad died last June, and then my mom died about 6.5 years ago. And, for many people, their parents' death is like really quite traumatic. And I must say that I'm incredibly grateful for the Dharma because for many decades I had been meditating on my parents' death as well as my own death, so that when it happened, you know, mentally, psychologically, I was prepared somehow, which made it much, much easier. Yeah. What I wasn't prepared for was the conflict that broke out in the family after my dad died, because I never thought that would happen. Which, you know, it's like, it really taught me a lesson. You really don't assume things don't happen. Yeah, don't assume things. Keep an open mind and be prepared for what you never thought would happen to happen. Yeah? And not only in bad ways, but also in good ways. Yeah? Sometimes right before people die, there's incredible reconciliation that can happen too. So to be able to be open to different situations. Yeah? But really, you know, it involves, I think, our own meditative practice. And then, of course, in terms of techniques, one thing that I found is very good, that blends well with the Dharma, not completely, but blends well and also helps us to look at our own mind. I don't know if any of you are familiar with nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg. Anybody? Yeah, some of you are familiar with it. So I think MVC is very good for getting us to slow down and think, what is the other person's feeling? What is their need? And what am I feeling? And what am I needing? Okay? And so, you know, he teaches that in nonviolent communication. I think that's very helpful because it puts us more in touch with ourselves. And when we know what we're feeling and what we're actually needing, we can often work with our mind either to fulfill what we're needing by giving ourselves some empathy, or realizing that what we're needing from a Dharma perspective is we're needing our attachment to be fulfilled, which is not going to happen. And so then being able to apply a Dharma antidote to release that attachment. Yeah. And I think MVC is quite good for getting us to think, you know, well, what possibly could this other person be feeling? Yeah, what could they be needing? And to actually open up the conversation so that they can express themselves, you know, and explore that. And when we're Mr. or Ms. Fix-It, there's no room to say, you know, are you angry? Are you jealous? Are you sad? Are you disappointed? Are you joyful? Yeah. There's no space when we're trying to fix people's problems to consider what they're feeling or what they might be needing. So again, slowing down enough to think, you know, where are they at, and to mirror back to them what we think they're saying, and be willing to change our idea if they tell us that we're wrong. This is an unpaid public announcement, because she mentioned it. This is the book, An Open-Hearted Life. It's published by Shambhala, and I wrote it together with a clinical psychologist. The subtitle, it's An Open-Hearted Life, Transformative Methods for Compassionate Living, from a clinical psychologist and a Buddhist nun. So my co-author is a professor at Eastern Washington University, and he is also very active in compassion-focused therapy, for those of you who are interested in that. And so we put together the book. It's for a general audience, it's not for a Buddhist audience, but there's a lot of Buddhism in it. Yeah, you know, yeah, quite a bit about, you know, the idea of compassion, how to generate compassion, and so on. And what's nice about the book, what I really appreciate, is there's short chapters, and at the end of each chapter, there's an exercise that kind of helps you think about the meaning of the chapter in terms of your own life and your own experience. Yeah. Which I think is really key to, you know, becoming a person who is open and receptive and can reach out and with compassion to benefit others. We also discuss a lot about what compassion is and what it isn't. Because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what compassion is. Sometimes people think compassion is just being a doormat. Yeah, that's not compassion. Yeah, you know, people think compassion is being weak. You just give in to everybody. To be really compassionate, it requires you have to have an incredibly strong mind and a lot of courage to be really compassionate. Yeah, and you have to be able to risk a lot to be really compassionate. Yeah, compassion is not for sissies. Yeah, you are not the world's doormat at all.